Well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The Second Amendment.
Leigh and I are once again hosting a podcast, and today we are honored to have a first-time guest. His name is Joe Malone of JM Training. How you doing today, Joe?
What's up, Joe? This is really exciting. I've been talking about this with my family all week. You know, because of your background, I spent a little bit of time in a Ranger regiment. That was back when I was 19 years old, so that's quite a while ago. But it's just really cool to get on here with somebody that's got the background that you have. And so I've been really looking forward to this conversation.
Cool. Thanks, man.
Yeah.
Joe, before we jump into any great detail of your past, I have a question for you. And it's a question I typically start off, and that is, what does the Second Amendment of the U.S. Constitution mean to you as an individual?
Yeah. So I'm really big on getting things understood before I give my opinion on it, and I'm a big fan of that, especially when it comes to the legislative piece in all of my classes. So let's talk a little bit about this and what the Second Amendment means.
Perfect.
You know, what's crazy is how little I actually still know about the Constitution. Like, I can't remember it, and you think I would be able to by now. But Second Amendment, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. Okay, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Pretty simple.
I think so.
To me, I transport myself back into the time when that was created, and I think why it was done that way. Then I relate it to my life and my experiences, because that's really all I can do, which, quite frankly, have been pretty robust when it comes to individual rights and guns and what they could do in terms of keeping a people free and ending oppression. And I think, from my own personal opinion, that they just got done with a war, right? I mean, technically still, in the midst of the aftermath taking place when they came up with that. And so they had been dealing with murder and rape and oppression for quite some time, for a long time. And the only thing ever created in the history of mankind that gives one person the ability to not just level the playing field, but to be able to stand up against that type of tyranny is a firearm. It was a sword back in the day or a bow and arrow, but the firearm is without a doubt the greatest personal safety tool ever created. A 90-pound, 90-year-old woman can defend herself against a 6'4", 250-pound hardened criminal.
Yeah, right. It levels the playing field in ways other weaponry of other ancient times didn't.
Exactly. Yeah, she can't swing that sword.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So to me, what that means is, a well-regulated militia, the people, the society, have a duty to fulfill the right to be able to bear arms for the purpose of protecting themselves against evil and tyranny. And so when I transport myself back in time and think about why they wrote that, well, they had just got done going through a lot of suffering and still were in the midst of a lot of it still. And I bring that to our modern time, and nothing has really changed in that regard. And so whether it's a government trying to overstep their bounds, whether it's criminals trying to harm the innocent, I think that pretty clearly states you shall always have the ability and the right to defend yourself against violence.
Gotcha. I don't disagree with you at all. I guess my question, a follow-up to that would be, are you an absolutist? Do you think that there should be any level of gun control? There should be restrictions? Or is it, if you're out and about in society, you're allowed a firearm?
So I don't know if I'm an absolutist on anything in life except for weapon safety. That I am an absolutist about. I'm pretty agnostic for the most part when it comes to most things, because every individual is going to be unique.
Mm-hmm.
But now, do I think anybody should be able to go into the store and just buy a gun? I've gotten a lot of flack in the past for saying no, I don't think that that's a right. Nobody should just be able to hop behind a vehicle and start driving 95 miles an hour down a side street without any proper training and guidance. and kill an innocent child. I think that it's our duty to be educated and to be trained on the things that allow us to maintain our rights. And I think that we should also be trained on things like how to speak properly so that we know how to convey our points. You know, when we talk about the First Amendment, I think that we should know how to speak properly so that we know how to articulate our thoughts and our emotions in a way that dare to be offensive, but aren't necessarily, because that will also teach us how to be more accepting of other people's opinions. And so when it comes to the Second Amendment, I think that it is our duty to have proper training and education and to prove yourself. And then the difficulty becomes, well, what's that standard? Who controls that standard?
Right.
I would say local society, because if everybody within your community did firearms training, then you'd be able to keep each other in check. Just like we did on special operations teams. If you suck at shooting, you suck, bro, and you need to really get your game up. And this is where we're at. And I think that as neighbors, we could hold each other accountable to that if we actually implemented this type of a policy within our societies.
Sort of the iron sharpens iron kind of
100%,
philosophy.
100%.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I appreciate your candidness. That's really interesting take on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that then we run into is if there are guidelines set forth, do those guidelines then become prohibitive for some people that then they can't get a firearm to defend themselves? And that's where you get into when are the guidelines or restrictions too much?
Yeah, and I will say this, that I am a really big fan of decentralized government. I do not believe in a strong central government. I've seen that have catastrophic consequences all over the world and in history. And I'm a very big fan of decentralized, giving the power to the people, the states, the local governance. I think that our local governments, our townships, our communities need to have exponentially more autonomy when it comes to creating these types of regulations and guidelines, because when you get down at the small unit level, like when you think about how a lot of these other countries are living, 2/3 of the world, the majority of politics are done at that mayor level of executive leadership,
right?
And they keep each other in check. And that's how we hold one another accountable, is by having transparency within small groups of people. And I'm not saying your whole personal life needs to be, talk of the town, but what I am saying is that if you beat your wife and the local community knows about it, well, one, they should have the right to do something about it, and two, they should have the right to say, no, you're not getting a gun because you're a threat to everybody. So it's not cut and dry by any means, but I have always seen the best types of accountability take place when we get to the smaller unit levels, local governance, and things like that.
Interesting.
Yep, that is interesting.
People that might actually know you, or
100%, yeah. If you're a drug dealer and everybody in the community knows about it, well, one, if we all actually practice the right to bear arms and we all are well trained and well educated and we have that sense of community, we're going to shove that out really quickly.
Right.
We're not going to tolerate it. And that also boils back into there will be less people who are technically going to be considered prohibitive because we don't put up with that crap. Here, right now in American society, because of globalism and the advancements of technology, which are great in so many ways, it pulls us away from one another. So you don't know if your neighbor is getting beaten. You don't know if the kids are getting cigarettes put out on them or if somebody's just recently been sexually assaulted. You don't know that stuff. But when you operate in more of a community context, we can't hide it because it's when you know somebody, you know when something's wrong, you know when things are going down. And as much as we hate that as human beings, it is such a vital reason why we've survived throughout the centuries is because we are social creatures and we're there for one another and we can help each other through those hard times. They're going to be hard either way.
And there's examples of that sort of stuff on a regular basis going to all sorts of urban neighborhoods. And,
yeah.
So-and-so lives over here, great guy, always willing to help. And anybody that's lived in the same neighborhood for 20, 25 years, their kids start to know, stay away from this house. That guy's a super nice guy. This guy will lend you any tool you need in a community like you're describing that would lend itself to kind of the people ruling the people.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, it just happened within the last 5, decades, like the last 50 years. We've seen technology has done amazing things. I'm not an anti-technology person by any sort, but it has allowed us to withdraw ourselves and become less social,
sure.
Which breeds more anxiety, which breeds more fear. Kind of talking about what you and I were starting to get into prior to launching the podcast here and why people are so fearful of one another. my dad, I was just talking to him and my uncle a couple days ago about how they had 35 kids on their block during the boomer era, and they were still in these heavily immigrant communities, Irish, Italian, Polish, whatever it was. And so they all knew each other and they understood the relationships between one another. But as technology advanced and the world got faster and we became more isolated, we lose track of that level of accountability for sure.
And it's interesting because some of the social media sites, when they were starting off, it was under the guise to become more social. And I think it's actually done the opposite.
It has, and it hasn't at the same time. Like, for example, I've gotten to work with some really incredible people because of social media. I've gotten to help some. I had a conversation with a woman yesterday. This poor woman, her child had been trafficked in high school, and she was asking me about ways to help her daughter find herself again. And we had a remarkable conversation. And by the way, I've worked with many women, young women, and older who have been sexually assaulted, and firearms training was the thing that got them back to themselves and have confidence again. But
do you think there's something? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but do you think that there's something with respect to, because I've seen in my experience helping similar demographics, for lack of a better word, some people in similar situations. I've seen that through the process of fighting through some adversity, that really helps them. Like that self-esteem part rises up. And, it's not an actual, I think I remember somebody, telling me in my firearms training background, like shooting a gun in your hands, causing that explosion to happen is like not a natural act.
Right.
Like your body automatically shouldn't like it. And just the process of doing that is like, you have to fight through some fear. Mm-hmm. You have to fight through some adversity. I had never fired a gun prior to, basic training. And so I remember, the hands shaking and stuff like that out in the firing range. And so I was just wondering if you thought that maybe that process of fighting through adversity was what helped them in some way.
It's definitely a part of it.
Yeah.
Absolutely creates new experiences, new neural pathways in the brain, new emotions, which makes them much more malleable for the experience that they're currently enduring. But it also gives them the ability to know that I could do this.
Yeah.
And so this, SOB or whatever, is never going to get to do that to me again. And I think that is the key for all people, is to lose the survivalist instinct that is so ingrained in all of our primitive brains. And so I wouldn't have had the opportunity to work with people like that if it wasn't for social media. But at the same time, it does give us a false sense of interaction, which is not the same as in-person interaction, which is neurochemically proven from a biological standpoint. When you have interactions in person within radiant or within the distance of other people, your body produces different neurochemicals as opposed to if you are talking to them via online. And
Interesting.
And that is directly correlated and linked with happiness within human beings. And so the more times that we're around other people and the more social we become, we develop happier neurochemical dispositions in our body. It doesn't mean that you're happy, but it does set the stage for it.
I have to say I didn't know that, while also not being surprised by it.
Yeah, it's when I talk about workplace violence and school violence, I actually talk about things that, from my understanding, are fairly unconventional, which is why I don't even try to work with schools anymore, because they just broke my heart so many times.
I'm sorry to hear that. I'm an educator. Like I'm a middle school teacher,
Dude.
And I do only the training on the side, summers, things like that. Yeah. And I feel your pain, but I've had some successes. I'm sorry that you've encountered that, but I generally agree with you. It can be disheartening.
I don't even know how many schools I've talked to anymore. It's close to 100, and I've given speeches at safety events where there was all the big universities were there. Their safety coordinators for youth programs, etc. I've tried working with schools. I've done free plans for them, and they're just so hell bent on locking down in place, which is the worst thing you could ever do once the threat's inside the building. But anyways, I digress to, when I talk about why we see so much erratic violence in society these days, a lot of it has to do with a neuropeptide called tachykinin and how it creates connections in the brain associated with past negative experiences within the modern frame. So basically something bad that happened to me 20 years ago, I'm not even consciously recognizing that I'm associating that to Joe because I see you every day and I'm in work or I deal with you in some form or another. But when we isolate ourselves, we develop a negative neurochemical disposition in the body associated with agitation and violence and erraticism. And so we could be sitting there talking to our coworkers via Zoom all day. This especially came out during the lockdowns and all that stuff, where people were just getting agitated as hell. And they didn't know why. It's because being socially isolated creates that disposition in the body. And so I think a large reason as to why we see a lot of erratic violence these days isn't just the nutrition that we're fed, isn't just the information and the lies that we're told and manipulated with, but also has a lot to do with the fact that we are becoming more socially isolated, and it creates that neurobiochemical disposition in the body associated with violence and negative behavior.
One of your goals is reach out, you were saying, pretty much through the nation.
Yeah, could you talk about that? How did you get from, I think we said before the podcast, 2019, you're leaving the Marine Corps and you start your business. How did that happen? And then maybe we could sort of answer that question chronologically from there. What brings you to where you are today?
Yeah, so I did 13 years in the Marine Corps, and the majority of that time was over at MARSOC, the Special Operations Command, and I ended up getting into some trouble. So I actually got kicked out of the Marine Corps. I was going to leave anyways. I was burnt out from my last Iraq deployment and just turning the place over to Iran after we kicked ISIS out of Mosul was one of the worst feelings of my life because we abandoned the Kurdish positions. The Kurds were great, and we had a M1 Abrams U.S. tank that we just gave to the Iraqi army, flying a picture of the Ayatollah, the Iranian Ayatollah, on the front of it that was so big we could see it from the Predator feed. Wow. And we were told abandon the position. The Iraqis are coming to take their territory back that the Kurds fought for and died for and maintained. And we support a government of Iraq. Anyways, long story short, I was just pretty heartbroken after that, and I was just done supporting the worst people. Yeah, I mean, child molesters in Afghanistan, whether it's part of their culture or not, the Iraqi government, it just is a...
I've heard this over and over from, I did not serve, I was in Iraq, I was not in Afghanistan. I've heard this from other veterans as well about that child molestation part.
Well, but dude,
it staggers me. Like, I just don't even know where to go.
It's weird because Afghanistan sucks so much for people who are listening. Afghanistan sucks so bad that if you spend your life as a young child being raped and a slave, and they call it a child boy, you're actually doing pretty good. I found this out. I was like, dude, you got chose to be a child boy? Congratulations. Because when you start to grow a beard and you develop manly features, you're going to get a daughter, you're going to get some cattle, you're going to get some land. So it's like you're making out pretty good by being sexually molested your entire life. That's how bad that place sucks.
And that's prevalent over there.
All over the place, whole country.
Wow.
Yeah, and I
think ancient Greece had a similar kind of thing.
I know that they had so. I think there's so.
Sort of, you took a young male, sort of as a, I forget the Greek word for it, but sort of as a, not a shy boy, but like as someone that you were going to groom, for lack of a better word, and it did have some social perks to it.
Yeah. So the Greeks have several different terms for the word love. They've got like agape and eros and all that stuff, and they all mean different types of things. And I wouldn't claim to be an expert on it, but from my understanding...
Nor am I, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding is that it was something pretty similar. I think it was more animalistic and less manipulative than I saw in Afghanistan, but who the fuck? I mean, I don't know. But point is I definitely think that it's pretty jacked up.
Okay, so you're disheartened by experiences toward the tail end of your career.
Yeah. So I ended up getting in some trouble, which was really stupid, and everybody just turned on me, and I got in a lot of trouble for some dumb stuff, and then they ended up throwing me out. And so when I got out, I was just completely, I was just so head spun. I was popping 26 medications, had been concussed a few times, didn't really understand how bad it was. I was drinking like crazy. I was acting erratic, lost all my money doing high-risk stock options trading. I was lying.
How old are you at this point, if you don't mind me asking?
Like 32, I think. Okay. And, I just gave up on life. I was falling asleep with a gun in my mouth every single night for probably like a month and a half, maybe more. I honestly don't know. I was living out of a tent, out of my truck.
Were you in Illinois at the time?
No, I was actually still
You don't have to
in
say
the
where.
Marines at this time.
Oh,
so it was like the last like couple months that I was in.
Okay.
Nobody gave a shit. Like nobody asked, what was wrong with you. Nobody picked up on it because when you get in trouble in the Marine Corps, it's like everybody just turns their back on you. And I had a lot of survivor's guilt more than anything. And so I just had a moment talking to a buddy of mine, and I was like, this is not me. This sucks. I don't want to live this way. And I started to learn about the power of the mind and personal development, people like Earl Nightingale, Bob Proctor, John Asseroff, things like that. And I started to apply those fundamentals. I learned a lot about neuroscience the last 18 months I was in, because I was in the brain injury clinic, applied those fundamentals, and then found my purpose. And I found my purpose to be that, to help people become capable of defending themselves.
Wow.
I get it to a certain extent.
Yeah. It's like one thing I was good at. I haven't been shot yet, so it's like, all right, well, I must be doing that part decent. Maybe I could help people avoid getting shot.
So you start your business
End of 2019.
2019.
Yeah, I went
how
over-
does that how does that happen?
Went over to Europe for a couple months. I was living out of a camper, went to Europe, did some contracting for a company out of Israel, setting up some intel programs, and then basically made enough money to put a down payment on the house. And then my wife, who I've known for a long time, like 20-some years, we were never together, but we started dating and moved in. And
Is this your home? Is
here.
Illinois your home or her home?
yeah, we both grew up in Willow Springs.
Okay.
Yeah, but
My mother-in-law lives in LaGrange.
yeah, right next door.
Yeah.
Beautiful town. LaGrange is beautiful.
Yeah, it is beautiful.
But I originally thought that everybody was going to want my help, all the schools. I was like, Marjorie Stoneman happened, and we trained for an active shooter threat in the special operations teams more than anything, because you're linking up with a partner force, unknown guerrillas, and we've done this where there was literally 5,000 guerrillas and like 5 of us in the side of a mountain along the border of Iraq and Syria, where they could have just shot us in the head and thrown us off the side of a mountain. And that's happened on multiple occasions. And you need to be ready for that insider threat. Also, at your base, when you are living with the partner force.
Yeah.
All of my deployments had insider attacks. We ended up, first Afghan deployment, 2 people got killed, 1 got shot in the neck. My second Afghan deployment, a buddy I worked with got killed. The doc got shot through the shin. And then the Iraq deployment, a buddy of mine's team had an insider attack. So nobody got killed on that one. But we are constantly prepared for an active shooter threat. And if you're not going to offensively neutralize the threat, well, what you need to do, especially when it's inside the building, inside the compound, is you need to get away from said threat. It's the most common sense thing on the face of the planet. I have a gun. I want to shoot you. What's the best thing that you could do if you can't shoot me back? Well, let me just get far away from you as fast as humanly possible.
Right.
Awesome. And then when you actually look at all the active shooter incidents for like the last 25 years, I haven't been doing this I haven't studied the last 2 years. Aside from the Vegas shooting, which was anomalous, over 90%, I might be a little off on my numbers now, but over 90% of the people killed less than 35 yards away from the shooter in the first initial round of gunfire, and you guessed it, while hiding. So why are we prioritizing this? It's crazy.
I have to jump in there because my youngest son just graduated, and they would do drills, and it was huddle in a corner.
Yeah.
And I've talked to Leigh for several years, and I told him, if you're ever in a real situation, from everything I've read, from everything I've been taught, I don't care what the teacher tells you. Take a chair, break the window, start running out the building.
So
because it's something like
distance is your friend.
90. I mean, I've read 95% of the people are not moving. So just the fact you're moving means you've increased your likelihood of not being a victim.
Yeah.
The fact you're creating distance, doing those in conjunction, drastically increase your chance of escaping. So I told him, listen, I'll go up to bat for you after the fact if it ever happens. Break a window, start running.
Yeah, well, what's crazy is you talk to the students and they all say, why are we sitting here? You talk to the teachers, and even the teachers, except for the ones who are so petrified to go against the grain, even they're like, this is stupid. Why are we just sitting here? Well, get out.
Well, they'll say that to you as an individual.
Right,
They
but
may not say that to the administration.
They won't. And that was the biggest problem I had with so many of these administrations, is that you are being an arrogant, I don't know what I could say on this podcast now, but you are seriously some of the worst people on the face of the planet, because you are so egomaniacal that you are unwilling to listen to somebody like myself, who's a special operations combat veteran, who has the highest security credential that you could have in the entire world, the CPP through ACES, it's the gold standard, and I'm coming to you as somebody who's lived in these environments telling you this is the best thing to do, and you still will put these children at risk just so you could say that you're the one who created the plan. The horrible, instead of run, hide, and fight, I call it hide, hope, and die. And that's exactly what they do. They all die the moment the shooter walks up on them. They're dead. Nobody's ever survived an active shooter incident where the shooter walked up and let them live, except one kid, actually in Marjorie Stoneman, and he just was on the court stand again a few days ago. He was doing some follow-up lawsuit stuff. But the shooter didn't even let him live on purpose. He thought he was dead. So he just walked past him. And he'd been shot 5 times already. Nobody has yet, I mean, unless I'm wrong, somebody please let me know and correct me. I'd love to hear that story. But it just makes no sense. And so when I was dealt that gut check when I was getting out, trying to really find myself again and this purpose, that was a huge blow, because I was lost. And I just couldn't understand why people were so apprehensive. And then I've been told it's because you're a white cop. I've never been a cop in my life. I don't see what the race or color of my skin has to do with anything. When it comes to the prevention piece of all this, I have a very unconventional thought process as well, and that is bringing the students together in a fun, engaging environment so that they can learn one another more on the small unit level, and so that the teachers and the staff could actually see how they interact with one another, so that you could stop somebody from having homicidal maniac thoughts to begin with. I mean, probably never stop people from thinking it, because all teenage boys are like psychopaths anyways, but you could at least have a finger on the pulse. But I've been told no by, I don't know, 60 or 70 or 80 schools at this point. I stopped trying. I don't even want to try anymore.
Yeah. That's really disappointing to hear that there's that much of a roadblock. And I know you and I have talked about a couple specific schools, but that's on a pretty large scale.
Yeah, all across the country, man. All across the country, major universities that have thousands of children at their summer camp programs, major universities, like all the big ones. And when all these people brought it back to their people, they were just told, no, we don't want them. They were like, 1, this is a lot easier than we expected it to be, but 2, it's technical and niche, and I don't feel comfortable telling the kids to go to X location, because I believe in having 4 pre-designated rally locations, north, south, east, and west, so that they can just go to hard geographic regions. They didn't feel comfortable enough to make those calls, and I get that. Do you go 100 yards, 300 yards, quarter mile? What does that distance look like based off of the totality of circumstances? And do they want to sign their name to that emergency policy and procedure? Hell no. I am so comfortable I put my credentials and my name on every policy that I sign, because if you call me into a court of law after an incident took place, I'm 100% confident answering everything that I can with actual scientific data. So
you think it comes down to a liability issue?
I think a liability issue, an arrogance issue, the administration is a fear-based issue. I think people are so paralyzed that they just listen to law enforcement. And unfortunately, cops have gotten a lot better at this, but they have never been designed to handle this type of a threat before. Mm-hmm. And they're making fear-based decisions because when you look at things like Uvalde, they're just so petrified to lose their job or go to prison, which now the chief I just saw got arrested, which rightfully so. That was a garbage-ass response. But it's a lot of fear is what it comes down to, fear-based decision-making.
So then, Joe, with JM training, what is your goal? What are you looking to do?
Yeah, at this point, where are you finding some purpose and some meaning? Yeah,
so I started teaching concealed carry classes. I really like that. Just kind of having to finagle where I teach and where I go shoot, which was a logistic hustle, but whatever. Got some clients that were on board with my philosophy when it came to workplace violence, so carried some corporate clients through the years and have developed some great relationships with them. And then now I'm really focusing on like the B2C, like the business to the consumer directly, and that's when we started the Lethality University, online training portal where it's interactive. We started with the Home Defense series, so I want to create a university where people can go and learn everything that I do in my mindset and my habits and the things that program my subconscious mind to be security conscious at that subconscious level. I don't believe in living in anxiety, head on a swivel. That sounds like it sucks to me. So it's all about programming the subconscious mind. How do we create habits of thought and habits of behavior that have a safety conscious aspect associated with them? Well, it's repetition, building a community, bringing people together. And so the vision now is to train millions of Americans across the country in all 50 states on ways that they could stand up against violence. And then the company mission statement is to train the right people at the right time, the right way, and give them the right equipment so that they can take a stand against violence. So as an FFL, I sell firearms. As a trainer, I certify people through NRA, USCCA, State of Illinois, my own company certifications if they want to go that far. And then through the online portal, they have an interactive course where there's scenarios that help them in the decision-making process when dealing with home-related issues. And
Can someone listening to this right now participate? Is it
we're live, dude.
We're ready.
And
How do they find you?
JoeMaloneTraining.com, and that's called the Lethality University. And it's about developing and cultivating a positive mindset, a positive belief system, being good to other people, and being capable of helping one another and using justified extreme violence when needed. It sucks. Nobody wants to get in conflict and be violent, but those capable of great lethality are capable of preserving great peace. Yeah. You can't preserve peace if you're incapable of not doing anything. Like if you can't kill or neutralize another human being who's trying to harm or kill you, if you can't neutralize that threat, then you're not peaceful. You're just incapable, and you're just flaccid. And so you need to have that ability to defend your home, your life, your family, the people you love and care about. Otherwise, you're just flailing through life, hoping that you don't get picked off, which you probably will because you're an easy target. And with all that, we also now have struck a really amazing deal with USCCA, Delta Defense, where just by joining the Lethality University, you can get complete access to everything the USCCA offers, all the self-defense insurance coverage, all of their training materials as well, which is cool because you kind of get multiple aspects of it. Their approach is a little bit different than mine, but we do mesh in a lot of similar ground. And so now not only can people get the equipment from JM Training. Not only can they get the training from JM Training, not only can they get the network from JM Training, but they could also get the insurance coverage, and check this, at a cheaper price than what you can get through the USCCA. So we've been able to absorb all these costs into a very cost-effective personal and family protection package.
Brilliant. It's cool.
I'm so stoked. We just brokered that deal last week.
That's fantastic.
Sounds like a great option for a lot of people.
Absolutely.
I'm so stoked. And if anybody listening is an elite USCCA member, literally call me and I will instantaneously save you money. Instantly. It will not lapse your coverage. It's the exact same coverage. You'll have access to all the exact same stuff. The only difference is you're going to save money, and you're going to have access to more stuff, everything that I bring to the table, as well as a Special Operations Marine. So,
what number would you want people to call to reach out to you?
You could just go to JoeMaloneTraining.com, and then
it's right on the website.
The Lethality University is right there. Yeah. So
spelled out JoeMalone training.com.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah.
So one of the things that you have studied in common with Leigh is person-to-person violence. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, that's huge to me. Like, why do we behave and experience violence, right? Like, what causes that? And that's where a lot of that everything boils down to the neurochemical disposition within the human being. That will be directly correlated with your emotions, which is directly correlated with your thoughts and actions, which is directly correlated with your energy and what you're doing in that moment. So if we could, and because the body's always seeking balance, if you have elevated positive neurochemical disposition in the body, so things like oxytocin, serotonin, some levels of adrenaline at a certain heart rate per minute, then you're going to be more loving and kind and open-hearted. You can't be violent and have that level of neurochemical disposition. On the opposite end, if you have elevated amounts of tachykinin, adrenaline, cortisol, or epinephrine, whatever it is, along with some other neuropeptides, then you're going to be violent. And you're going to be erratic and agitated, and you can't be happy and loving. So how do we reduce the one and increase the other? That's been the big focus of my study from like a neurobiology perspective.
So that's like a philosophical and physical function of an individual.
Yeah, to a degree, I would say, but I would say that it's mostly scientific. It is just, as a Marine, as a simpleton, right? I need to break everything down as simple as possible. And so I try to create the strongest scientific based evidence for a case to say, hey, look, when you're angry, you feel a way, and that could be because of your thoughts or because of an experience. Ultimately, we have the ability to control that. And so if you feel a way, you have these chemicals in your body.
Period.
And if you feel that way, you have those chemicals in your body.
Gotcha.
And so I just try to keep it as simple as possible because that's just how I roll.
That's interesting. Leigh, I'm curious, what's your take on that? Because I know you've studied violence specific to
A lot. Yeah, a lot. I've never studied it from the aspect that Joe has, from that neurochemical, the neurobiology part of it, like that I'm learning as I'm sitting here. I certainly have studied it sort of like from a behavior standpoint. And just because, I feel that it's imperative to prepare yourself for some of the perils in the world. And if you can understand human behavior, maybe you could pick up on some pre-contact cues. Maybe you could be better at detecting violence before it happens.
Or even de-escalating.
And then
if you know that certain things exist, then you know what to look for and maybe get that diminished prior to it escalating.
Yeah, we certainly don't want to. We don't want to be doing all of our work, right on the X or right next to the X or after the X. Like, we want to be pushing our interventions to violence and dealing with violence. We want to manage it. I always feel like I come back to that word, that like violent interactions between human beings. They're not. There's no solutions to it. Everybody wants solutions, right? They want, hey, this is what you should do in this situation. I feel like I've never, quite found those answers. But what you can certainly do is learn some ways to try to manage it, and then just be prepared that if you don't manage it, that you have some use of force options, and whether it be unarmed or whether it be using some kind of tool. And a deadly force, the best tool being firearm.
And when you say on the X, you're talking like the actual
that's the point at which the violent event crosses the timeline, right?
Gotcha.
It's happening now. But obviously you can have way more success dealing with that, further back in the timeline before you get to that point where the violence is happening.
Yeah.
So, Joe, one of the things I've brought up on the podcast a couple times, and I'm curious your take on this, is Leigh has I think a great philosophy, and that is you are more likely to have to defend yourself or your family from a physical altercation than necessarily a life-threatening incident. Do you feel as though the being prepared physically without a firearm is as important as having a firearm?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure if you look at the statistics and numbers, because a lot of that physical security isn't even necessarily the fight or conflict itself. And I believe in 3 stages of conflict. You have the disagreement, then you have the actual argument between different states of existence and consciousness, and then you have the actual conflict, physical, the war itself. And so a lot of the times it's intimidation. If you're a man, how do you handle a decent-sized 18 or even a 16-year-old who punches your wife in the face? What do you do? What could you do? If you're just some incapable human being, like what do you do? What do you do when somebody bumps into your wife and they're disrespectful to her and they just tell her to go screw herself? You just sit there and lose the respect of your family member, the woman who's looking to you for safety and security at the most primitive level? Good luck being the man in that relationship for the rest of your time. If you have no ability to keep them safe, it will get exploited at some point. And you could go with your head in the sand afterwards, acting like everything went back to normal, but it won't. Because she, at a primitive level, will have less faith in your ability to keep them safe. And I'm just using he and she because that traditionally is how that's how I roll. I do believe men have a duty to protect women. And physiologically, look at us compared to women.
Right.
History has shown who goes to war.
Right.
So, anyways, not to say that women can't go to war. I fought with some badass women, but they were just in different capacities than what we try to force them into here in the United States. Like, they were like lightweight snipers and stuff like that. They were awesome. Rojava over in Syria. But yeah, I think it's important. And I think that when you have the ability to physically defend yourself, you have the ability to de-escalate much better things because you're not in that survivalist mindset. As an argument develops, you lose ability for the outermost regions of the brain to function, your critical thought processes, because your sympathetic survival nervous system is elevating, and therefore you can't think clearly when you're in a survivalist mindset. And so you lose the ability to de-escalate by losing the ability to think creatively. And you lost that ability because of your fear of knowing how incapable you are to actually protect yourself if things did cross that line.
Gotcha.
It's interesting. I had a related conversation with a young man that I did some training with yesterday, and we were talking about sort of like how the ego plays into certain violent interactions, especially like the social kind that you're talking about, where essentially the way I look at, like, if I get angry because of the way someone offended my sensibilities, and this comes from, have you read Rory Miller at all? Everybody out there, get Rory Miller's books. Fascinating stuff on human behavior and violence, and I think he would call it an educational beatdown, right? And so this is anytime one human wants to use intimidation or violence in order to correct a perceived slight, and obviously maybe that's a mild word for someone touching your wife inappropriately, copping her ass. Yeah. Right. Kind of thing. I was wondering what you might think about this, and you don't have to answer here today if you want to ponder it a little bit. But if defusing and de-escalation are a goal, and you sort of adopt a policy, for lack of a better word, between husband and wife, and the policy is like we're not going to get ourselves in violent situations because once we get on the X, whether it be me or whether it be her, the possibilities of how that could go very badly for both of us, right, are endless. Like lots of bad things could happen if, so I, hopefully, if I look like you, I intimidate the guy and he backs down. And that's sort of in an educational beatdown. A lot of times what people will do is they'll, if they sincerely apologize, they can usually avoid the beating, right? So what if he doesn't apologize? And so now we're playing sort of like escalation, right? And so I was wondering what you thought about the possibility that you could have a pre-agreed upon, for lack of a better word, standard operating procedure. And so if we're faced with a situation where we feel as though we need to teach a lesson to someone else, that we don't do that because that's not actually our job. Our job is not to educate anyone except our own children. And so if someone is so rude as to have, touched your ass or pushed you out of the way, that it's not our job to intervene. And if we diffuse that situation, if it was aggressive, right, like the ass grab, if it was that aggressive and overt, if we actually work together and we diffuse it, then actually our relationship deepens and our self-esteem and ego, instead of taking a hit, because I think you're absolutely right. I think if I have it in my mind that I must respond to a slight against my wife, and if for any reason I don't or I fail, my ego will take a hit. And I think you're absolutely right that eventually that plays it out in the relationship, right? Because the husband sits there and replays that, right? And perhaps even the wife sits there and replays it. However, if you have agreed that this is what we will do if we're faced, and it could be as simple as road rage, because road rage is, I think, another example of educational beatdown, right? Like, this person did something that put us at a little risk or just pissed us off for some reason, and so now I feel like I have to teach that person a lesson. If I can diffuse that and not do that, that winds up actually a victory, which actually makes me feel better. And I was just wondering what you think about that.
Yeah, I think I see what you're saying, and
it's a mind game. It's a sort of a shell game to a certain extent.
I think that could be used as a sense of empowerment, but I also think that it could be used as a cop-out. And I think that it becomes a sense of empowerment when you choose to do whatever in the situation. For me, I can't say that when it comes to like touching my wife.
That's really interesting. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
When it comes to touching my wife, you've already crossed that threshold. There is no coming back from that. There is no de-escalation because you've already laid the assault. Now, if other couples want to come to some sort of agreement and work through that stuff, that's totally up to them, but it needs to be pure. You can't just fake that and use that as a cop-out for the fact that you don't want to get punched in the face, possibly, and fighting the guy back. When it comes to...
having the potency is powerful too, right? Being able to.
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
And I think that's what you talked about earlier, sort of like
the capability,
the firearms, the capability, and there's great beauty in that is to be a potent man, to be a potent woman, and then using that judiciously.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of Jordan Peterson, and that is one of his big beliefs of his.
Yeah.
That being capable of great violence and having the restraint and control to not be violent is completely different than not being able to be violent.
But damn, I really do think if that's where you're going, correct me if I'm wrong, like that's a key component, is for it not to be a cop out for something that you can't do.
Yeah.
You're sort of hiding behind.
The agreement.
Yeah.
And
really interesting. That's very insightful.
And we can't lie to ourselves. Like, we can lie to everybody else in the world, but we cannot lie to ourselves internally.
It'll fester.
Exactly. And that's when you start to fall away from what I call the true self, the greatest version of you. And the distance, the actual self goes from the true self. The area in between is angst. And I think it was Sartre, the philosopher, who came up with that. I could be wrong, but philosophy that I've lived a lot of my life by, where to sleep, well at night, have that clear conscience. But you need to be willing. We've lost touch with this so much. You need to be willing to die every single day of your life, because it could come today. And we don't feel like we have to anymore, because we've been living in the confines of the greatest, most secure nation ever created in the history of mankind. People talk about the Roman Empire. Roman Empire ain't got shit on the United States of America, okay? They were still dying of like dysentery back then. Right. So when you look at the totality of everything within modern society, we have it better than ever before.
We've sort of safetied ourselves into a problem
of ignorance, where good times create the weak men.
Yep.
And not being willing to take it to that extreme radiates a certain level of energy, which opens you up to being victimized to begin with. Being willing to go that distance. You put me in a crowded space with the majority of other men these days, and then you put a hardened criminal looking to victimize somebody, I guarantee you, I'm not the first person who's going for it.
Choose elsewhere. Yeah,
I'm not, and that doesn't because I'm giving him a hard look. That's not because I'm being a dick. I'm actually being. I like to consider myself as a pretty nice person. I try to be incredibly respectful to other people. Hear their views.
Treat people properly.
Be in service to my fellow man. But it's the energy that I radiate, and the physical stature that I pose. I'm like, and I'm not the biggest dude in the world by any means, but I'm going to make it hard for you. And we always want to avoid that. Even the criminals want to avoid that as much as possible. So that's really what it boils down to, is just make it as hard as possible for people to take advantage of you and the people you love and care about. And that's really when you win the game.
And is that a lot of what this community that you're building online with Lethality University? That's kind of what you're promoting?
It's everything.
Yep.
Everything. How to cultivate a positive mindset, how to cultivate good relationships, how to eat nutritious food that doesn't create oxidative stress on the inside of your body and all your organs and adrenal glands. I sit down with nutritionists. I sit down with neuroscientists. I have interviews with them. I sit down with, you probably heard of Tony Blauer, for example. So I sat down with Tony, and we had a really good conversation about human behavioral mechanisms and characteristics. I've sat down with some of the world's leading neuro research scientists, and it's all everything that I've used in my life to take myself and to transform my life. I was telling Joe before you got here, I used to shoot up heroin as a kid. I was 16 years old, sticking needles in my arms, snorting it, shooting it, smoking crack, hanging out on the city streets with like hookers and piss-stained mattresses and stuff. And I transformed my life and my mindset into a special operations Marine. Then I go this way, fall up, down, left, right, brings me to who I am here today. So a lot of mental and emotional resilience has been built over the years and cultivated by utilizing these exact techniques that have been tried and tested true throughout all of time. And I want to give people that information. What they do with it, I'll help them as much as I possibly can. But most people will fall and fail and cop out because they don't believe they're worthy of that type of change. And that's why we usually wait until a horrible incident in our life causes us to change.
Yeah, that triggering event.
And so the goal here is to show people that in order to be lethal, you don't have to suffer losing a child. Your child doesn't have to be trafficked. You don't have to have a near-death experience or be shot or wounded or robbed or stabbed. You'll see that there are more and more people who are level-headed and like-minded and normal people who just want to simply keep their families safe. And every human being should want that. But unfortunately, again, being raised within the confines of the greatest nation ever exist, it breeds a lot of the ignorance where we don't think we need to do that anymore. Press 4 buttons on a phone, and you've got men and women with guns coming to help you in less than 4 to 6 minutes. That's crazy. That is an amazing thing, but at the same time, it's created a lot of weakness and a lot of ignorance.
Yeah, Leigh has spoken many times about being accountable for your own safety and not relying on the government, i.e. a police department.
Yeah.
That you are accountable as an individual for for your safety, for your kids, for your wife, for your family.
Yeah, I think Coach Blauer says, and it's you're on point in your safety event, your violent event. You're it.
You're your own first responder.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, and this is boiling down to, the term, the lethality university comes from the lethal lifestyle, which embodies the tenets of Bushido, the way of the warrior, the samurai warrior from when I was living in Japan. And what it all boils down to, whether it's your safety, security, or your emotions and your choices in the quality of your life, is you, no matter what. You are to blame for exactly where you're at, feeling exactly how you feel, doing exactly what you're doing. Nobody else is. Because even if you were beaten or raped or stabbed or something, I get there are certain physiological things that take place in the brain that solidify those neural networks so that those emotions can be readily available throughout triggers throughout your day. I get that. But the reality of it is that if it happened to you in the past, it's not happening to you right now. So you are going to be responsible with feeling the way that you feel right now. And that's one of the greatest gifts that God gave us as humans, is we have the ability to consciously intervene against our emotions. And we could change, Tony Robbins says, change your physical state, you change your mental and emotional state. So what do? You go run some sprints, work out. Ultimately, everything in this life, especially your safety and security, boils down to you. Horrible story from Austin, Texas. Really great friend of mine is high-ranking police officer down there. And they had a 911 call, this is back in January, from a husband who was at work about 40 minutes away from home, saying that a crazy man was kicking in the door of his house, and he saw him on the security camera, and his wife was freaking out. She was in there with their 12-year-old special needs daughter. I think she had like cerebral palsy or something. She was in a wheelchair. And this guy randomly kicked in their door and murdered his family. Nothing he could do except listen on the security camera footage. By the time the police got there, he had set up an ambush. He shot a couple of the cops. They survived. And then he ended up taking off, and he surrendered. So, he's still living and in jail right now. Turns out this guy decided to just go on a random murder streak from San Antonio up to Austin, kick in a random door, and murdered a woman and a child. And what I'm about to say is going to sound harsh, and it should be a lesson for anybody out there listening. It's his fault. It's his fault. And that breaks my heart. Because if they would have just had a shotgun, they'd both still be alive.
Right.
But it is your individual responsibility to, in this case, as a man, to lead your family by example, to train them and teach them, because you're going to die someday too, how to defend against the evil that does live in this world. Most people are great people. Most people are such good people.
Yeah.
I agree with you.
But
not all.
Right.
There is a real thing as evil.
why would you risk that? Why would you risk that? His life is destroyed, ruined, and it's gone. It's like when I lost all my money 4 times, high options, stock trading, all of it's gone. $260,000 of debt. It's my fault. Then I was able to apply the changes needed in order to pay off all the debt. And I'm very proud to say last month I just paid off the last of that $260,000.
That's great to hear.
I would have never done it, though, if I wouldn't have accepted responsibility.
Oh, sure. That's literally the first step.
Yeah. And we just get away from that with, everybody gets a trophy. Oh, it's okay, sweetie. Screw that. You suck. Tell me I suck, so I can know what I suck at, so I can get better at it. It's all about just accepting the fact that success is failures built on top of one another, and you just never give up. You never quit. And it's not that hard to become capable of defending yourself. It's actually very easy.
I was thinking the same thing. It's actually not.
It's so easy.
Yeah, it's not much.
But most people,
like any other responsibility, like it's really, you could spend a lot of time working out and still not make much progress.
Yeah.
Like any responsibility, you have to get educated about it and find out the right streams of information, and then you'll see progress. And it's the same thing with self-defense. If you're just going to run down to the local black belt and think that that's going to be your, self-defense and security solution, you're probably going to have better results finding something else elsewhere.
Yeah, and it's hard for people to conceptualize this because of the way that we've been raised, and when you get older, your belief systems fall into place. But it is a very harsh reality that unfortunately people don't understand until it's too late. And it's I just really encourage people. It's fun.
Absolutely.
Especially learning how to shoot guns.
Yeah.
It's building a new skill. It's learning a new piece of knowledge and information which grows you and empowers you. And that's one of the biggest things that drives me nuts about all this gun control legislation is that you can never disempower people into compliance.
Right.
You can never do that. It's never worked in the history of mankind. I can't tell you, don't do X, Y, or Z because that's going to be best for you. That's not empowering. That's disempowering. And no matter what, people are always going to have the ability to stab you or beat you or whatever it is. So you can only empower individuals into safety and security. You can never disempower them into safety and security. And it brings people together. And going back to the women who had been, sexually assaulted, it gave them a sense of individuality again. They felt like they had a wall to finally put back up that had been torn down. And it happens by conquering that temporary fear, by learning that new skill, by becoming somebody new and growing into this new version of you. All of it comes back down. It's not just shooting a gun. It's learning how to protect your life. And that is the greatest thing that anybody could know how to do. Protect your life. Imagine saving another human being's life. Like, hey, I saw this happening to that person, and so I was able to step in and make the right choices and do the right thing. And when you see the look on a daughter's face, I've never had to step in with violence intervention to rescue other people, but I've had many incidents in my life. One of the more recent ones was I was on an airplane and a guy was having a heart attack, and he was from Ukraine. Him and his wife were refugees. They're heading out to Washington, and it was bad. Like, the dude was going down hard, and we had to make an emergency landing. And the daughter called me about 2 months after this incident took place. He would have died if that nurse and I hadn't been on that plane, because the airline doctor was saying, keep flying. Just keep flying him to the destination. And I told her, this dude is going to die. If you do not land this plane right now, I cannot keep him alive. Like, he's barely hanging on. And they landed the plane, and she called me, Justin, and this is 2 months after the event, right? In tears, telling me, thank you so much for helping my father. Spoke no English. We were literally using Google Translate to translate with his wife on the airplane Wi-Fi, which was garbage. And that, to give somebody, whether it's a woman who had been assaulted, the ability to go out and trust again and to date and to find beauty in this life after the most horrific thing happens to them. You're giving their children life. You're giving their husband more life. You're giving them more life. You're giving society more life. You're allowing the opportunity for love to flourish. But you can't do that if you are just some incapable, incompetent person who's just going to stand by and call 911 and hope that the cops aren't bogged down so that they get there in time. It's the greatest gift that you could ever give another human being, the gift of more time with the people they love.
I agree with you, and I also think that seems to not be the prevalent mentality out there now, today. So you've been doing some of the firearms training for 4 to 5 years? Mm-hmm. Is that safe? Leigh, you've been doing it a little bit longer. Do you see a change? Do you see an influx of more people starting to want to have mentality and philosophy like Joe is talking about? Or do you think that it's trending the other way?
No, I it's hard for me to put my finger on it exactly. I think that after, what was the hurricane in Texas? Was it Katrina?
Katrina was
Louisiana,
05 in New Orleans.
People living in the Superdome or what have you, and I think
maybe 06. Sorry,
I think people, if I'm correct, it was after that on television, some of the shows like the prepper shows sort of became popular.
Yeah.
Following that, and I think what happened is there was a in the late 80s and early 90s, I think there was a perception of our government that it was omnipotent, it could do anything, and it was going to save you no matter what.
Yeah,
right. You can turn to them; they're there for you.
And there was these movies where there was a satellite, and it could track a guy on the ground wherever he was running, and they could find you if you were hiding in a closet somewhere in a hotel, this satellite would be able to find you. And I think people had this idea of government that it was omnipotent. And then Katrina happened, and people saw that, the plan for me is that I'll be in the Superdome on the floor with no safety
for days.
And I want to say a lot I'm sorry to the gun people out there, because they really wanted to. The argument has been made that so crime has gone down, and people have been more prepared because of firearms. But I think that was a catalyst event. I think that's what set people off. Okay, so let me see if I could keep my train of thought. And Then I think again, COVID. People that would have never trained with me, neighbors, where the wife was like, I don't want any guns in the house, right? And then suddenly, like, they were like clamoring, and so like I don't do much marketing. Almost all my business is word of mouth, and suddenly like that interim, like people were just like flocking, right? And people were coming, and I had men like literally like in tears at the range, like they're shooting and they're trying, and I'm like, dude, are you all right? Like, do you need a moment? Like, why are you crying? And it's like, I just never thought I would have to do this. And it was like the summer of love. It was the rioting and all that stuff, and that really.
Well, gun sales skyrocketed during that point.
Yeah, I wasn't an FFL then, but I wish I was. That's for sure.
Yeah, and it pushed, it sort of pushed people to, take more responsibility. I do have a little bit of a problem, and it goes back to what I think that you agree. Like, I think people look at sort of as concealed carry and a firearm use as like that's the check the box, right? So I've done my security job,
Yeah.
right? And it's like, okay, this is going to be it. And I have a problem with that. Like, you need to be a potent person physically, because one, the threat might not rise to that level of deadly force, but still be a threat. So you need to be, capable below that threshold, and most people aren't ready for that.
Yeah.
And then just all the knowledge part, right? All the part that keeps you out of those problems. I think good resources are like get some information from people who are qualified to talk about such things, and it doesn't have to be me. It could be Joe Malone. It could be whoever. But just go out and get good information that leads you to results that'll be a little bit better. Go check out the Lethal
U. Lethal U.
University.
That, yeah.
Lethality University, something like that, and just start building your own repertoire and start finding out about this thing called violence. It's really interesting to me that this is a primordial activity of humans, that we've been violent from the get-go, and we all have that side of ourselves, but yet we are so distant from it somehow. Like we do a lot of mental gymnastics to keep ourselves from, clearly not the people like in this room necessarily, but certainly plenty of people want to keep all that stuff at arm's distance, because that makes them feel more comfortable somehow. I like to be comfortable with the uncomfortable. I like to expose myself to it, so that if I have to encounter it, I have to endure it. I have some of the wherewithal to hopefully persevere and get through it. I don't know if I answered your question. I think yes. I think your question was, are people taking preparedness? Are more people taking it seriously and taking responsibility? I do think so.
The trend is moving upwards to.
Here, how about this? I think maybe we're at the. I think there was a wave in the 80s that maybe started in the 80s, maybe started with the bodybuilders prior to that in the 70s, and then sort of like a wave in the 80s, because that's where you started to see like the local gyms, like the Bally's Fitness and stuff like that, and then and then it was like CrossFit and everything else. So like I think people are taking more responsibility for their health. You see a lot more marketing of different kinds of foods, healthier choices for foods, the organic kind of things, and I think that we've progressed, I think, in that regard. Certainly, we still have some plenty of problems with young people and their physical ability. But that at the same time we've had those improvements, I think the internet and gaming and stuff like that has had a big hit. I understand that the military is having a hard time finding males who can like pass the physical requirements for recruitment.
Well, plus people just don't want to join the military anyways because it's stupid to do. It sucks. Who wants to join the military and get their legs blown off and then get forced a bunch of DE&I garbage and talk about how you need to women should be in the infantry just as much as men should. This is crazy stuff, and people are going to die, already have died because of this stuff, and support these wars that we got going on overseas that are just endless, stupid industry building, military industrial complex garbage. There's no point in risking your life because you're not fighting for freedom anymore. You're just fighting to be a cog in the military industrial complex wheel. But going back to the physical aspect of it, when you're capable of being physically fit just to some regard, there's a video of, I don't know if this was a man or a woman, but they had a baby in a stroller, and like the baby started rolling into a busy street, and they literally just turned around and like fell on the ground because they were so incapable of even turning around quickly to get the baby. The baby was about to get creamed by oncoming traffic going like 40 miles an hour. Thank God somebody capable of running 10 feet was on the sidewalk and grabbed the baby and saved him. So when you're capable of defending yourself to some regard in a physical sense, you're actually capable of helping the guy on the plane who has a heart attack get to the back of the plane so you can work on them. You're capable of helping people get out of the building that's on fire. You're capable of just carrying your child for a block, because carrying these damn kids that's exhausting, man. 30-pound little kid, that will wear you down.
Yeah.
So you gotta just have that ability, and then that resonates in the primitive part of the brain. Says I'm capable of doing X, Y, or Z, and so that's going to cool that survivalist sympathetic nervous system, which allows you to just live more free and creatively, and be more open-minded and more open-hearted to the people around you. So it all compounds on itself, absolutely, 100%.
So yeah, I think things are getting better in a lot of ways, but I think at a certain point, like only a certain fraction of society is ever going to take on those responsibilities.
Yeah, because it's work.
It is.
And we try to avoid that at all costs, because conservation of energy and the avoidance of pain and death are the two biggest priorities our brain has. At the primitive subconscious, like not even sub, but unconscious level, all information comes in through our senses, travels through the basal ganglia portion of the brain, heads to the amygdala, fear center, and then it says, hey, is this something we fear? Go into the primitive survivalist part. Is it something we don't fear? Go into the neocortex, creative, logical consciousness part of the brain. And so information needs to first pass through that primitive part before it reaches the consciousness, which is why we have to always calm ourselves down and think more clearly when we get upset about stuff, why we're emotional creatures. And if you are incapable of guaranteeing at an unconscious level, or at least providing some level of guarantee to your brain, saying, hey, if a lion's chasing me, I could run really good. If I get attacked by somebody, I could fight back really well. That's why you usually see like the biggest, most deadly person in the room, usually the calmest person in the room, because they know that they have the ability to defend themselves. So it allows them to be more present and to be more loving and to be more open-minded and more open-hearted.
Yeah, I think it may have been Rory Miller that sort of said something about like, you're in trouble, or like one of the best ways to diffuse a fight is if like you're really agitated and you're, try to intimidate someone. And if the person looks at you and just yawns, like you've got a problem on your hands.
Yeah. There's another video that came out pretty recently. I do a lot of these reviews on YouTube, Joe Malone training, if anybody wants to watch them. But some kid pulls out a gun on a guy, and you just hear him in the security camera. He goes, "Are you serious?" And the kid's like, "Yeah, give me your money." And then he just picks this kid up and body slams the hell out of him, like breaks his arm from body slamming him so hard. But the video was funny because it said, you screwed up when, and then he goes, "Are you serious?" That's the guy's response. It's like you pull a gun out on him. He's like, "Seriously, I'm going to have to mess you up right now." And that's when you definitely screwed up.
Yeah. I remember I must have been still a teenager. And I remember a Chicago cop stopping a bunch of gangbangers. And he has all these gangbangers, 4 or 5 of them, but they're facing him, their backs to a wall. And, one of them tried something to, some kind of move. And I remember this, 6'3". I was younger then, maybe he wasn't that tall, but he seemed that big to me. And I just remember this man, and he didn't, he wasn't wasn't the picture of physical fitness, but he was just a big man. But I'll tell you what he knew how to do is he knew how to use the tool of violence. And he sort of just did. He slapped this kid, pimp slapped him twice, kneed him in the nuts, slammed him back against the wall, and like that was it. And he didn't cripple him. He didn't shoot him with a taser. He didn't shoot him with his gun. But he got all those kids' respect,
right?
Because he understood how to use the tool of violence in a way. He knew how to use his physicality to control the situation, and I'll never ever forget it. It's like I can still see it in my mind.
That's an interesting memory.
Yeah. It's the beauty of what a man can do when you're sort of accustomed to putting the tool of violence. And I think it's a problem that we have too, is that we don't have that many men who who know how to do it anymore.
Yeah, that's a big problem because the people who do know how to do it are hardened criminals. And they're not just some people lose sight of how physically tough somebody who has spent their life in crime actually can be. Physically, just hard as a person. You try punching that guy in the face, he's been punched in the face 10,000 times, bro. You're not doing nothing to him with your weak little hands that are all manicured. Nothing against anybody who gets manicured hands. I've got them once or twice, my wife at least. Otherwise, I've never done it, so I guess something is offensive against you. But just joking. But you just have to know this stuff, because if you don't, you're just flailing throughout society and life, and somebody's going to take advantage of you at some point. And it's just going to eat away at you and fester at you because you let them do that to you. And it's happened to me growing up. I got punked out and beat up countless times. And those moments stood with me. And I said, okay, obviously need to know how to throw a punch better because this idiot beat me up. But that comes back to that self-accountability and being honest with yourself.
I knew this was going to be a good one.
This has been great. Before we conclude, Joe, if you had to send one message out that you really wanted people to kind of resonate with people, what would that be?
It would be that most people are good people, and that we are living in a time where we are being fed more misinformation. And if you're being emotionally driven by the information being fed to you, then you need to take a big step back because you're being manipulated. Nothing that's being propagated in the news should emotionally drive you to be distrustful or like your fellow human beings less. And the way that you recognize most people are good people is by applying the single greatest personal safety fundamental I have at least discovered and what's worked for me and the people I've taught. And that is what I call the rule of the 5s and 25s. And we use this overseas when looking for IEDs, when dismounting from vehicles. We would do a 5-meter scan of our environment and then a 25-meter scan as we began to push out to make sure we didn't step on any IEDs. And so the way to think of this is, as you're going throughout your day, do a 5 and 25-meter scan and look people in the face and eyes as you pass them by. And if you don't know what 5 and 25 meters is, if you could hit them with a stone, just stay off your phone. So if somebody's within a stone's throw, stay off your phone. Look people in the face and eyes as you pass them by. Or for some women who don't want to lead men on, look in their direction, like public speaking, so that they are aware that you are aware of their presence. And when you do this, one, you'll realize how little people look back at you, but two, if they do look back at you, you just give them a nod and say hi or whatever, pass them by, and you'll see most people are just scared or agitated, or a lot of it is really fearful because of the information that they're being manipulated with. And when you start to realize that most people are good people, and you're aware of this by looking at them in the face and eyes as you pass them by, then the majority of your encounters and experiences without people through your day will be good, decent experiences. And if you have mostly good, decent experiences with people throughout your day, then that means that you're having mostly good, decent days. And so by pulling yourself into the moment, and by connecting with your fellow human beings as you're passing them by, you begin to see what good really looks like. And then, that's when the real power begins. Because now, evil stands out very obviously to you. And this is how we develop situational awareness. And when we have good situational awareness, now we could learn to avoid and to escape the situations that ultimately would lead to a defensive encounter. We could avoid them, and we can escape them if they're building without losing faith in humanity. Because again, most people are really good people.
I have to tell you, that wasn't the answer I expected, but I loved it.
Cool.
I absolutely loved it. So if anybody out there wants to continue with some of what you were just saying, they can just go to JoeMaloneTraining.com.
Yeah, JoeMaloneTraining.com. Join the Lethality University. Save money on your self-defense insurance, USCCA coverage, if that's what you want. Reach out to me. You can shoot me an email on there too, CEO@JoeMaloneTraining.com. And my number's on there somewhere, so you could feel free to always call as well.
Well, I have to extend a very big thank you for allowing us to come into your facility and take the time to talk to us. I know I learned a little bit. Hopefully people listening have learned a little bit and actually opt to continue that education with you.
Yeah, man. And at a minimum, is cool collaborating, getting to meet you guys. And I feel like we're going to have to do a couple more of these as time progresses for sure, especially this year with everything that's going on.
I know I would love that.
Especially when we go viral.
Well, thank you very much, Joe. Appreciate
thanks, guys.
the time.
All right, thank you, Joe.
Thank you.